Wait, you're going out like that? Yes? Is there something wrong with my outfit? Something wrong? You're practically naked! I'm really not. Everything that matters is covered. But your arms, your bosom, they're on display! Look, if some onlooker can't handle the fact that I have shoulders, you'll get sunburnt! And more freckles! What? Oh, no I won't. I put on sunblock. Sunblock? Yeah, it's this lotion you put on that stops you tanning or burning. Gimme! The Victorians. Am I right? They were prudish and buttoned up and would universally go into fainting spells at a mere glimpse of ankle. Except, no, that last one's a myth. The Victorians were certainly less comfortable with showing skin than 21st century people, and I do think we've developed a far healthier attitude about what it means to cover or not cover oneself with clothing, but the mythos of Victorian modesty is well due for a bit of deconstruction by context. Fortunately, that's what we do here. Hi, I'm V, fashion historian, wearer of immodest clothes, and firmly convinced that the past is far more complex and nuanced than the story we tell ourselves about it. Little bit of a content note for this video. Usually, I'm quite circumspect in discussing matters of human sexuality, but this video will require me to engage with it a little more directly than I usually do. Nothing graphic or descriptive, but I will spend basically the whole video discussing what past and present societies thought of as sexy versus non-sexual clothing, including some attitudes that were and are very unhealthy. Sexuality is part of the spectrum of human experience, and people have used fashion and clothing to interact with it for millennia. So without needing to get graphic, I think it's important to be able to talk about the fact that these attitudes exist and affect society. You forgot, and make sarcastic comments, and jokes. Yes, there may be some of those too. Especially if I can't convince her to rein it in. I don't think it's me you need to worry about, but carry on. Okay, so I actually have a secret strategy for keeping her snarkiness from turning this video into sarcastic demonetization bait. June's Journey, a free-to-download mobile game who have kindly sponsored this video. The game is set in the 1920s, an era where many of those Victorian social norms about modesty were being thrown out the window. Against this glamorous backdrop, and I do mean glamorous, because just look at these character designs. I don't even like most 1920s fashion, and I love this. The game follows our protagonist June Parker through a thrilling mystery storyline where she uncovers her family's secrets to solve her sister's murder. The gameplay is mostly finding hidden objects in equally glamorous and beautiful 1920s scenes. I actually find a lot of video games stressful or alarming. Super fast-paced action and complicated controls break my concentration too much for me to actually play most games, well, at all, let alone enough to advance the story. So just needing to find and tap the hidden objects is a relief. This is kind of like, I don't know, the mobile game equivalent of sewing or knitting or something to keep your hands busy. June's Journey strikes just the right balance. It's engaging enough to be enjoyable and rewarding, full of pretty things to look at, but not so intense you can't play it to relax, or, you know, to keep someone focused on the shiny pretty things instead of making crude jokes. Download June's Journey for free by clicking the link below in the description. June's Journey is available on Android and iOS mobile devices, as well as on PC through Facebook Games. Hopefully if I let her keep playing, she'll be too distracted to interrupt. Right, so, myths about Victorian modesty. Let's start with an easy one, the oft-repeated story that the Victorians put fabric covers on their table legs because uncovered table legs were somehow too suggestive to be left visible. We can trace this account directly back to the writings of one Captain Frederick Marryat, a British Navy officer turned writer, who published the travelogue Diary in America in 1839. The full annotated bibliography can be found on my Patreon. Click up over there or in the description. He narrates two anecdotes in sequence on this subject. In the first, he accompanies a female friend to Niagara Falls, where she slips on a rock and scrapes her shin. He asks her, "Did you hurt your leg very much?" And she's shocked at his coarse language. In America, or so the lady explains, it's vulgar to say the word leg in mixed company, and one should instead call it a limb. This practice is partially corroborated by at least one American writer, although she makes a somewhat derisive reference to Marryatt's stories. Conversely, the British were less buttoned up about it and used the word leg and limb interchangeably. Marryatt's story is considered to be a possibly exaggerated dig at American prudishness, which was a thing. By the way, do not forget that colonized America was a society started by Puritans. This is borne out by Marryatt's next anecdote. He recounts that a few months later, when escorting a different female acquaintance to a school for young ladies, he saw the famous table leg covers on the legs of the piano in the reception room. The schoolmistress explains that to demonstrate her extreme delicacy to her students' parents, she had dressed the limbs of the piano in modest little trousers with frills at the bottom of them. As for how less than a page out of some guy's travel diary turned into such a pervasive myth, well, firstly, Marryatt was apparently at best somewhat eccentric by American standards and at worst downright unlikable. I've been unable to trace this back to a solid primary source, but the current publisher of Diary in America and 3 different academic papers on his work mentioned that he was either hanged or burnt in effigy by some Americans as a response to his comments on their culture. It probably also helped that he was friends with Charles Dickens, who must have decided the leg versus limb story was too good not to reuse. Dickens wrote a version of it into Martin Chuzzlewit, only this time about the phrase, "the naked eye." So, you know, the story got around a bit. And it's not as though covering up table legs with fabric was unheard of in the real world of 19th century home decor. It was just with ordinary tablecloths, rather than specially made table leg trousers or some such thing. And the reasoning was pretty much the same as for using tablecloths today. Maybe your table is plainly made, or out of a cheap material? Throw some fabric over it and no one will know. Maybe you're trying to elevate your living room with a matchy-matchy color scheme? The author Catherine Beecher, sometimes called the Martha Stewart of the 19th century, has suggestions for you in her 1869 book, American Women's Home. She says instead of paying $30 to $40 upon a little, narrow, cold, marble-topped stand, basically paying for a fancy, brand-new, custom-made coffee table, you can put a wool broadcloth cover with an ornate border on a cheap pine table, such as you may buy for $4 or $5 any day. If you're looking to save more money, you can even make up the tablecloth yourself. And it should, of course, be a coordinated shade of green with all the other green things you're choosing for your parlor. There are plenty of practical reasons to use tablecloths as well, mostly to do with cleaning. Coal was used for heat in many Victorian-era homes, resulting in a constant battle against soot and dust. You might find it easier to launder a tablecloth than deal with soot building up on your furniture. Not that laundry was objectively easy in the 19th century. But I put a great deal of the table leg cover myth's popularity down to modern society's need to look back at the Victorians and feel superior, and our willingness to suspend all reasonable disbelief to do so. Really, what does it say about you if you look at a table leg and the first thing you think is, "Ah yes, this naked wood is too provocative to be seen in mixed company. Get your mind out of the gutter." Hey, I thought we weren't shaming people on this channel. It's a table leg! People are weird, okay? You know this. You're not wrong, but I still maintain that the vast majority of people can remain unflustered in the presence of ordinary furniture. Having put that myth to bed, or not to bed, as it were, let's look at what the Victorians actually did consider modest and appropriate dress. Yes, it's true that women generally wore skirts reaching the top of the foot, if not the floor, and it's true that showing your legs for the purpose of showing your legs was considered risque. But it's not like no one ever did that. Please see my earlier video on how 19th century pinup has confused even the field of dress history for ample evidence of that. And ample 19th century legs, if that's your thing. It is, however, certainly not the case that a woman of good social standing could never show her ankles or even calves in company. Let me direct your attention to these hunting and shooting outfits from the 1880s and 90s, featuring skirts ending just below the knee. Hunting and shooting were both very much upper-class sports, so the fact that you were going at all, and could afford an outfit specifically for doing so, meant you were almost certainly a proper lady. And here were your ankles, out there for everyone to see. Because even the Victorians agreed that trekking through the brush in a floor-length skirt was more trouble than it was worth. And if the men in your party saw your ankles and calves, well, you were hunting, so that was their problem. Even outside of purpose-made sportswear outfits, 19th century people did have the ability to tell the difference between a leg shown for provocative purposes, such as in the stocking shows that spawned so much Victorian pinup, and a leg that existed as part of daily life. These 1898 ads for rubber shoe gaiters show plenty of visible ankles in various settings to demonstrate the product. One could argue that this was yet another instance of using sexuality to advertise, and perhaps it was, but it wasn't considered so shocking that it couldn't be printed and distributed like any other advertisement. Make what jokes you will about them being called rubbers, the Victorians hadn't got there yet. Another feature of Victorian era modest dress we hear of is the universal high collars and long sleeves. Apparently, no one could handle the sight of chest or arm or shoulder either. Wait. What's that? Crazy low necklines? Bare shoulders? Sleeveless ball gowns? Yet, this is another one where the standards depended on context. Victorian society had something of a dress code for when it was and wasn't okay to bare your chest and arms, a deliberately confusing one, as I discovered when I meant to make such a short-sleeved, off-the-shoulder evening gown. More to see if you click over there. The short version is that for formal evening events, short-sleeved or sleeveless dresses with low necklines were acceptable. It was a little confusing for less formal evening events, which could be sort of an in-between, but the one constant was that you never exposed your chest or arms during the day. Why was that? Because the sun's out and no one had invented sunscreen. Of course, fashion set by a bunch of white people were going to cover you up more during the day. You might burn. And even if you didn't burn, you might tan or get freckles, which were, according to Victorian society, the pinnacle of unsightliness for all the usual awful reasons. There's an intersection of colorism and classism and racism going on here. Europeans had long seen darker skin as both lower class and less attractive because only people of wealth and status could afford to stay out of the sun rather than doing some form of outdoor labor. Freckles were considered unattractive for the same reason. How this came to be thought of as modest dress follows a pattern I've noticed. Certain types of clothing start out as utilitarian practices and end up setting the standard for modesty many years after being normalized. Headscarves are another example of this. More info over there. Short version is they're a great way to keep dirt out of your hair and have been for so long that Westerners almost forgot they had a practical use. Not that there wasn't such a thing as too much cleavage, even in formal evening wear. John Singer Sargent's Portrait of Madame X is perhaps the most famous example. Although it is a little tricky to tell how much of the scandalized reception was to do with the neckline, which is fairly low, even by modern standards, just not outrageous. The jeweled spaghetti straps on the dress bodice were at least as unusual, and the reputation of the subject was already all over the tabloids, so that probably contributed too. Of course, this is far from the first time a high-status person showed a scandalous amount of chest and mostly got away with it. Going back into the 18th century, there were even a few, Parisian, fashion plates of dresses cut so low the nipples were out. I want to be clear, these were not examples of what ordinary people were wearing in any century. Only high-status people could get away with these sorts of risque fashion choices, and even the model for Madame X found herself facing more scandal than she wanted to. But that's also true today with celebrity fashion. The rich and famous have always been able to get away with more than regular folks, and had the resources to better survive or leverage any resulting social censure. There's one place outside of this pattern where I've seen the short sleeves and lower necklines in Victorian-era fashion. Children's clothes. For a while in the 1850s and 60s, it was not unusual for children to be dressed in short-sleeved dresses without high collars, regardless of what time it was. Also, it's my understanding that children were rarely welcome at fully formal evening events, so it's not like the time of day was really relevant. This went out of fashion in the 1870s, replaced by similar sleeve and collar styles to adult dress. But you know what stuck around? Shorter skirts! 19th century children's clothes nearly always featured skirts cut just below the knee, showing feet, ankles, stockings, and sometimes even drawers sticking out below. And Victorian society, a society so modest that you weren't even supposed to say the word leg, did not see a problem with this. And here's why I think this is. These are children. This is not to say that creeps didn't exist in the Victorian era. Creeps have always existed, and a few of them probably, unfortunately, always will. Thinking that there's any magical setting, past or present, where it's impossible that any such thing would ever happen, basically just lets it fly under the radar. You don't make creepiness go away by ignoring it. That simply doesn't work. But I digress. That's a whole separate rant. Victorian society was 100% accustomed to the sight of ankles, lower legs, and sometimes even knees in public when the limbs in question belonged to children under the age of 16 or so. It was when someone reached the age of maturity, such as the transition from girlhood to womanhood, that they would start wearing adult clothing with floor-length skirts and fully pinned up hair. There was certainly a continuum. The skirts would be cut longer and longer over the course of the wearer's teenage years, and the hairstyles would change from looser styles or braided pigtails and the like to more complex grown-up and fully pinned up arrangements. But there's something really notable about the fact that the sight of someone's ankles or legs or hair wasn't considered provocative until that person was mature enough to engage in sexual behavior. Under appropriate circumstances, like being married, of course, these were still the Victorians. The attitude was much less, she's too young to be showing that much, and more, she's too young, therefore it doesn't matter that she's showing that much. This is a stark contrast to how much of the modern Western world views the bodies of children. And let's be real, this is applied almost exclusively to children perceived as female. Every summer, I see posts circulating with stern reminders that if she's too young to wear shorts that short, she's too young for you to look at her legs. Like, it's good to have these reminders being said, but what on earth went wrong that we need to say it? Rather than seeing children as inherently not to be sexualized, no matter what they're wearing, because that is a literal child, we've started seeing bodies and their visibility as inherently sexual, even in totally non-sexual contexts, and even when those bodies belong to literal children. This is honestly disgusting attitude, and it's codified into such things as school dress codes, which have a habit of using reasonable-ish sounding language to enforce sexist, racist, and transphobic attitudes. It's far more common for school dress codes to specifically prohibit items of clothing considered women's wear or girls' clothes, and to aim a larger number of rules at these styles. Some even go so far as to talk about cleavage. Like, that's not wildly open to interpretation based on body size and how much of a creep the teacher is being. When these codes ban gender-neutral or boys' clothes, it's often styles with racialized associations, like do-rags and sagging pants. And, unsurprisingly, dress code enforcement is not consistent, with penalties disproportionately directed at Black, brown, and queer students. What we should be teaching children is that the world is a wide and varied place, that they will encounter all sorts of people with all sorts of appearances and all sorts of clothes, and that they are both able and expected to take this in stride. We should not be teaching them that it is okay to lose their cool over someone else's appearance unless they've been directly invited to do so. Dress codes, even the ones acting like they're egalitarian by not using gendered language, are just one more tool used to tell marginalized students that their learning and development and future is less important than the learning and development and future of the hypothetical, usually white, usually boys, that they are supposedly distracting. Yes, I realize that that is one heck of a run-on sentence, but I have some feelings, and they require a great deal of very specific and derisive words to express. Thank you. I agree that there are times and places where it is not socially appropriate to wear overtly sexual clothing, and that most professional and academic settings fall under this. However, what counts as overtly sexual clothing is, you guessed it, dependent on context. The Victorians absolutely would consider me, an adult woman, wearing my hair down to be a provocative thing. There was a bit of a trope of having a portrait done of a woman with her hair down that was only for her husband's eyes. But me wearing my hair down in California in the year of our calendar 2023? No big deal. Everyone does it. There is a world of difference between a tank top whose straps are not perfectly lined up to cover bra straps and a top that is cut to purposefully display an ornate bra. Not an undershirt, not something to fill in the neckline, like I said, context. This is without even getting too far into the issues of assuming that someone dressed in a sexually attractive manner must want specifically your attention, because that's another whole other rant. I maintain that most people can tell the difference between those two sorts of outfits when they want to. It just suits a lot of people's purposes to pretend they can't. Whether that's to apply sexist, racist punishments to school-age children, or to direct sexist, racist harassment at strangers who are minding their own business. The problem boils down to this. There's an inherent hypocrisy to a system that punishes the student who has bra straps, but not the student who grabs another person's bra straps and snaps them. All this to say, when the Victorians, with all their comparative prudishness, have a healthier and safer attitude towards modesty than you do, you really ought to reconsider your choices. And when a whole society getting hot and bothered over table legs seems like the reasonable explanation, you ought to reconsider any more realistic option. History is full of ordinary human foibles, and while I have no desire to ever live among Victorian attitudes towards modesty and bodies, we have to properly understand where we came from in order to likewise understand how far we still have to go. Thanks for tuning into this not-so-little rant, and thanks to June's Journey for sponsoring and keeping that one occupied while we do history. You can download the game at the link in the description. Tell us in the comments about your favorite weird Victorian myth, click the button to tell YouTube you liked what you saw, subscribe for more fashion history sass, and please do consider joining the SnappyDragon Studios Patreon to support the channel and get shiny bonus content like detailed source notes. Oh, you gotta tell them to hit the bell too, apparently that's important. Aren't YouTube's notifications notoriously flaky? Yeah, but you still gotta tell them, otherwise no one will get them. Fair point. Ring the bell if you want to, maybe, possibly, if YouTube remembers, get notified when I post stuff. It'll happen about twice a month. Of course, if that's not soon enough, click Hereabouts to listen to me rant on various other topics. Meanwhile, I am going back outside to enjoy this lovely weather, with plenty of sunscreen.